April 30th, 1945. Adolf Hitler commits suicide. A week later, on May 8th, 1945, Nazi Germany surrenders. The United States, the Soviet Union, and the rest of the powerhouses of the world turn towards you. There seems to be no hope for your country, but you know your military. They won't ever surrender. Japanese soldiers will fight to the very end, defying all odds. August 6, 1945, Hiroshima. Nearby, you would probably be dead instantly. If you survived the initial impact, the heat may have incinerated you. If you survived the heat, the radiation would corrode you. If you survived that, you stand in the ruins of Hiroshima, a city leveled off the face of the planet. Thousands of civilians dead, and thousands more will die from radiation. This war you did not sign up for, nor escalate, is at your doorstep, destroying your home, killing your family, and crushing your country. But your soldiers follow the ideals of Bushido that date back to the days of the samurai. They are loyal to Emperor Hirohito. 3 days later, August 9th, 1945, Nagasaki. A bomb even more powerful than that at Hiroshima. Another city leveled, thousands more dead. Civilians, children, gone. Deadly radiation will linger. 6 days later, Japan surrenders. The military that was thought to never surrender, surrendered. The deadliest human conflict the world has ever seen is over, and your country surrenders. 2 major cities destroyed, thousands dead, injured, or displaced from the 2 attacks. The United States is now occupying your cities, westernizing your country. Your military culture of Bushido has failed. Your imperialistic government is dissolving, and yet you, the citizen, are the one paying for their crimes. You mourn your dead family. You mourn your injured neighbor. You mourn your destroyed home. You grieve for your whole country. But how does a whole country grieve? Before I continue, this video will talk about arguably the most major global event of the 20th century that has thousands of tangents and immeasurable context and complexities to it, so let's try to have a hair of nuance when I discuss this topic. Decrying the use of the atomic bomb is not a celebration of imperialist Japan. Criticizing the Japanese Empire is not equivalent to praising the United States. When I say that Japan's culture becoming westernized is a bad thing, that doesn't mean that Western culture is objectively bad. Obviously, the negative aspects arise from Japan losing part of its identity. I know these things are extremely complicated and hope I don't have to hedge everything I say in this video. In 1954, Toho Studios released Godzilla, a film about a giant lizard-like monster that attacks Japan after being awoken by nuclear testing. Godzilla would go on to spawn the longest-running film franchise of all time, as well as countless multimedia products such as toys, video games, comics, and so much more. Godzilla has become an international cultural icon and one of the most recognizable and iconic characters of all time, and it all started with this monumental 1954 film. Because Godzilla is an international icon, and because this franchise spawned over 37 movies of varying quality and seriousness, some modern audiences think of Godzilla solely as an over-the-top, silly monster movie. And while some of the other Godzilla films definitely are unserious, which isn't inherently a bad thing, the original 1954 film is anything but. Godzilla is a deeply serious, deeply solemn film about destruction, existential fear, and the mourning of an entire country. Godzilla came out less than a decade after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and was filmed the same year that the American Castle Bravo atomic testing at Bikini Atoll occurred, making these themes of nuclear destruction extremely topical for the time. Director Ishiro Honda said that he explicitly intended for the destruction of Godzilla to mirror the destruction from the atomic bombs. Honda explained by saying, "If Godzilla had been a dinosaur or some other animal, he would have been killed by just one cannonball. But if he were equal to an atomic bomb, we wouldn't know what to do. So I took the characteristics of an atomic bomb and applied them to Godzilla." However, I also think Godzilla goes deeper than a simple one-to-one thematic relationship between Godzilla and the atomic bomb. Because I don't think Godzilla is only a stand-in for nuclear weaponry, I think he is a lot more than that. Godzilla is an interesting antagonist because he lies in the category of an amoral antagonist, as opposed to immoral. An immoral antagonist is one who explicitly makes evil decisions. Hans Landa, Darth Vader, Freddy Krueger, these are immoral villains who actively choose to commit these bad deeds. Godzilla is not like these villains. Godzilla is an amoral animal that works outside the confines of good and bad morality. Godzilla is a force of nature who acts through the natural world rather than the humanistic world of morality. Think like Bruce from Jaws or the dinosaurs from Jurassic Park. They're the antagonists of the film from a story structural position, but in actuality they aren't necessarily evil beings. The real antagonists of those films are John Hammond and Mayor Vaughn because they make more active, immoral decisions. Because Godzilla is an amoral villain, I think this is where the metaphor of Godzilla diverges from a one-to-one relationship with the atomic bomb. Although the bombs themselves are inanimate objects, the decisions to create and to use these weapons was an active choice made by people. It was a deliberate, immoral decision, whereas Godzilla's destruction isn't a deliberate choice of evil, but rather more akin to a natural disaster. So what does this mean in terms of what Godzilla represents? One way to look at Godzilla is as a stand-in for the power of nature. Nuclear testing unleashed the beast, so it can be seen as nature retaliating against humanity's cruelty. Godzilla is a reminder of the natural world's strength, that we are meager creatures at the mercy of our great planet, and that if we push against the natural order too much, calamity ensues. With the framing of Godzilla being an amoral force of nature rather than an immoral villain, it can be easy to almost feel bad for Godzilla in a way. He's just an animal who doesn't act on greed or evil like humans do. While yes, the destruction from Godzilla is terrifying and dangerous and needs to be stopped, it's hard to fully view Godzilla as evil. This might be a strange comparison, but it's kind of like Harambe. Yes, the young boy in the enclosure was in danger, but that doesn't mean Harambe was malicious. So when Harambe was killed, the world was upset because he didn't deserve it. I wouldn't say it's exactly the same with Godzilla because this is what Godzilla did, but I think the ideas are connected at least. The idea of Godzilla's morality is toyed around with a lot in the Godzilla sequels as well. Sometimes Godzilla is portrayed as a straight-up villain, like in Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack. Other times, Godzilla is portrayed as a hero, protecting Earth from other, more evil monsters. And oftentimes when he is protecting Earth, he is a reluctant hero, a sort of enemy of my enemy is my friend type of deal. But Godzilla isn't just about the destruction, it is also about the recovery. Film can so easily glorify and glamorize violence and destructive scale, but Godzilla does a great job of framing the destruction with this mournful period afterwards. The aftermath of Godzilla's assault is one of the most mournful and soul-destroying scenes in cinema. Honda doesn't pull any punches on depicting the human casualties of the destruction. Seeing these images in Godzilla make you reflect on the recovery of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Bodies being pulled from the rubble, homes completely leveled, paranoia coating every face, sadness pulsing through the very air. This downtime in the film lets the audience catch their breath from the action and chaos of the raid, but also contextualizes the destruction, reminding the audience of the devastation that has occurred, and reminding the audience of the real-life devastation that occurred in 1945. Godzilla's themes don't end there though. Like I said, Godzilla isn't a one-to-one metaphorical replacement for the atomic bomb, but rather Godzilla is indicative of the overarching paranoia and fear about nuclear development. The film opens with a ship being destroyed and the fishing in the area being reduced to zero due to Godzilla. This is actually a reference to a real-life event where the US tested their Castle Bravo hydrogen bombs at Bikini Atoll, which contaminated the fish caught by a Japanese vessel in the same year that Godzilla was released. The contaminated fish sparked more anxieties about the use of nuclear testing and weaponry, eventually leading to the Japanese Council Against Atomic and Hydrogen Bombs, and an overall anti-nuclear movement within Japan and overseas. The dropping of the bombs in 1945 was devastating, but watching the nuclear arms race between the US and the USSR inflicted a looming dread into the world. Godzilla, as well as legendary director Akira Kurosawa's film I Live in Fear, which is one of his most underrated works, were films that explored this dread. Yes, the destruction of Godzilla is reminiscent of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but the majority of the runtime, the feeling isn't the destructive force, it's more the paranoia and trepidation. It captures this feeling of lack of control. The people in Godzilla are at the whim of both nature and the world governments. If a true nuclear holocaust was to occur, we would just have to face the destruction like they do to Godzilla. It's a powerless dread that creeps into the soul. It's so unsettling sitting here knowing the destruction that can and will unfold. And for Japan, and in turn the rest of the world, this was an ardent and rampant emotion. Godzilla elevates these profound themes on a technical level as well. Firstly, for the looming dread, I think Godzilla's score is perfect for this feeling. I can't play it in this video for fear of copyright, but it's one of the best themes written for any film. It has this large, deep brass notes at the beginning, hinting at the sheer size and weight of Godzilla. It perfectly encapsulates the awe-inspiring size and fear that Godzilla has. It's a musical embodiment of megalophobia. It then transitions into the string section and leans more into this looming dread feeling. The changing time signatures of this section elevates that dread because of the beat's unpredictability. The next section of the theme has a striking, driving ostinato, creating a more energetic feeling, but still maintaining the fear. This driving yet anxious section portrays the energy of trying to solve the issues of Godzilla. It has the vibe of people running around trying to muster up a plan. It toes the line between anxiety and drive that is present in the film. The score displays the different and evolving feelings towards Godzilla himself, from megalophobic fear to looming dread to drive to solve the problem. Godzilla also revolutionized the filming technique called suitmation that became a prevalent practice in the kaiju genre for decades. Giant monster movies made before Godzilla tended to use mostly stop-motion effects to create their creatures, as well as a combination of rear projection, matte paintings, and miniatures. Suitmation, on the other hand, was when an actor would put on a suit and do the movements of the monster. They would walk through a scale model set where the tallest buildings would be around the average height of a person. This scale set made the monster's suit look like they were towering over real buildings and allowed the actors in the suit to create the movements on the spot. The monster would also often be filmed at a higher frame rate to make their movements look slower, like a giant monster would move. Although many people would consider suitmation a dated technique, I am a staunch defender of it. Specifically in the original Godzilla, with its grainy film aesthetic and stark contrast lighting, the suitmation looks great. Yes, you can tell it's a man in a suit, and if you look closely, yes, the miniatures look like miniatures. But if you're watching this scene and focusing on how the scale set looks like miniatures, then you're a loser. Because Godzilla is one of the best looking black and white films ever made. So many shots in this film are jaw-dropping and awe-inspiring. Another aspect of the suitmation that I think elevates it is that the actors are physically doing the movements, so it has this sort of tactility to it. Since there's a real person stomping, the weight of that stomp can be felt. In the way the force is pushing around him, the slight recoil within each movement, it makes the monsters truly come to life. The visual effects in many modern Godzilla movies like Godzilla x Kong are objectively fantastic, but they lack that tactility and weight of the suitmation. In Godzilla x Kong, Godzilla is far larger than he is in the original film, but he runs around and jumps without a care in the world, detracting from the gravity of the monster. Also, the suitmation in some of the Showa-era films does look a little rough, but look at how incredible the Heisei Godzilla films look with their suitmation. Godzilla's ending does feel like a very standard way to end the film and nothing necessarily of note. Protagonist fights the antagonist dies, protagonist goes back to their old lives, and there's a hint at a sequel. Very run-of-the-mill, cookie-cutter ending. But I do think that there's more to unpack here. Firstly, the way that they defeat Godzilla is through Serizawa's oxygen destroyer, a terribly destructive invention powerful enough to defeat even Godzilla. Serizawa keeps this a secret for the majority of the film because he knows how dangerous this can be in the wrong hands. Essentially, the oxygen destroyer and Serizawa are Oppenheimer and the bomb. It's a force so destructive that it should never be used. But Oppenheimer's creation had already been used, and in a post-Hiroshima world, the oxygen destroyer may be necessary. Godzilla is an unstoppable force raising Japan due to the nuclear testing. The only way to fight him is with the oxygen destroyer, literally fighting fire with fire. This can almost be connected with the USSR and US arms race, but Godzilla turns this theme. Serizawa is so committed to the oxygen destroyer staying out of the world's hands that he sacrifices himself, taking the secret of the invention to the grave. One use of his invention was enough to stop the problem, but never again shall it be used. Instead of an endless arms race that ends in destruction, the problem is fixed and the cause is to never be touched again. The film also teases that Godzilla isn't fully dead, which can be perceived as a cheap setup for sequels, which it definitely sets up for sequels. However, I think within the film it adds to the theme, essentially saying that Godzilla might not be completely gone and that continuing nuclear testing could awaken him again. The problem isn't fully solved. The world needs to change in order to suppress the apocalypse. We staved off the primordial onslaught, but if we continue down the road of ever-evolving destruction, Godzilla may one day return with a vengeance. The original Godzilla film encapsulates the complex Japanese recovery from nuclear weaponry, from losing lives, cities, patriotic morale, and parts of their culture. The film also stands as a warning for the entire world, a parable to stop escalation, that the only result from an exponential increase is total destruction.